Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. Stay tuned until the end for a special offer. Hello, my loves. Are you a procrastinator like me? Do you often find yourself rushing at the last minute before an impending deadline? Well, you've stumbled across the right video for you. In this video, I will talk about how I finished this oil painting for an upcoming gallery show in just 4 days using only one main layer. Oil painting sometimes gets a bad rap for taking too long to dry, resulting in a slow process that can be stressful if you have a tight deadline, or if you're just eager to make progress on your painting but have to force yourself to wait around for the most recent layer to dry. But with the right preparation and technique, oil painting doesn't always have to be so slow. Today, I will share my tips on how to paint fast, and hopefully once we learn how to combat the slow drying reputation of oils, it will seem less daunting in general. I mean, if you eradicate the slow drying time, it's pretty much a flawless medium that everyone should fall in love with immediately, am I right? Before I start, just in case you missed part 1 of this video, I'll link it right now on the screen and in the video description. In part 1, I go over my pre-painting process of preparing reference photos, creating a digital concept sketch, and also how I created the outlines on my wood panel. Also, if you want to see a more thorough 60-minute version of this tutorial that will incorporate tips for the reference photo collage and digital concept, as well as the traditional oil painting advice on how to paint faster, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/happydartist. Okay, back to the tutorial. The best way to avoid waiting for multiple layers to dry is to avoid painting so many layers to begin with. This is a technique they taught in class called window washing, which basically means picking a starting point and painting very carefully from that point on until you cover the entire piece in well-rendered paint. I like to start by first painting the darkest part of the piece to visually anchor my value spectrum. Then I can calibrate all the other values by comparing them to that darkest value, which in this case is the solid black background. The first and primary layer should be rendered as completely and accurately as possible, which is why it helps to have a polished reference photo you can rely on. I'm trying to replicate the exact values and colors I see in my reference photo, all the while staying within the colored pencil lines I had drawn earlier. I treat it as a very serious coloring book where I only have one opportunity to touch the lines, because once paint hits the colored pencil, it will smear and disappear. So that's why you see me painting one petal or one leaf at a time. And also, just because I'm working within one layer doesn't mean I can't physically layer the paint. Working wet on wet actually has its benefits, and with a little finesse, it can actually be preferable in many cases to working layer by layer. When the paint is wet, it's easier to blend and soften, so I often found myself using a dry blending brush to blur the edges where two elements touch, and creating a soft, dreamy aesthetic in the process. Also, make sure to follow the fat over lean rule even when you're working with just one layer, because your first application of paint should be relatively thin, and that will allow you to layer thicker paint on top of it, even when that initial layer is still wet. I also found it easier to start with the darker values, then midtones, then save the highlights for last. It's always easier to lighten a patch of wet paint than it is to darken it. Sometimes I would purposefully over-darken certain sections in anticipation of piling light paint on top of it afterward. For example, I may cover an entire petal in dark values and midtones only, and it may initially look kind of flat due to the absence of highlights. But as long as I apply the darker tones thinly, I can then use a thicker application of highlights to add volume to the form, with the midtones underneath lightly blending with the new highlights and creating a more elegant, subtle transition. Another important factor to consider is your painting medium. I used to use Galca gel, which I still highly recommend because it's got a very satisfying texture while also decreasing the drying time. But nowadays, I'm trying out a new medium taught by my art teachers, which is a mixture of oleoresin gel, a fast-drying thick medium from Rublev, and linseed oil, which is a slow-drying medium. Normally, you're not supposed to mix two random mediums together without research, but since my teachers swear by this formula, I knew it was safe to go ahead and use. It takes quite a bit of stirring and mixing to get the ideal consistency, which can be thicker or thinner depending on your preference. The medium isn't as fast drying as Galkit gel, but I found it's only slower by a day or so tops. The benefit of the oleoresin gel plus linseed oil medium is that it makes the paint easier to spread while still maintaining some body and thickness. It also just feels so luxurious to use. I highly recommend it. Even though it feels like you're taking longer by rendering the first layer so meticulously, it actually saves a lot of time in the long run, I promise. Also, by getting the painting looking as good as possible on the first pass, you end up avoiding having to repaint certain sections over and over again. You'll find that after a polished first layer, the second and third layers can be reserved for glazing, refinement, and finishing touches, rather than needing to wait around for 2 to 3 layers to dry to fix major mistakes. But in order to get things looking good on the first pass, you'll need a thorough and polished reference photo, like I mentioned before. That can allow you to just copy the photo as faithfully as possible, reducing the amount of problem solving needed during the painting process. This requires a bit of extra time to patiently iterate on your digital mockup or reference collage to get it to a state that you'd be happy to paint from. In essence, you just want your reference photo to look pretty close to what your ideal finished painting would look like. Ultimately, the rule of thumb for painting fast is to spend a little bit of extra time up front in order to save time overall. And that about wraps up today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope it was useful. Please feel free to comment any requests or suggestions for future videos, as I'm always open to new ideas. If you're interested in adopting the original, she will be on display starting August 13th at Modern Eden Gallery in San Francisco. I'll also leave their contact info in the video description. But for now, I do have fine art prints of this piece available in my shop at happyd-artist.com. And of course, you guessed it, my eternal never-ending sale is still going on in my shop, so if you'd like 20% off your order of prints and originals, just enter the code HOLIDAY at happyd-artist.com. And if you're interested in learning more about how to paint and draw, I have lots of art educational content on my Patreon page, including exclusive video tutorials, step-by-step photo tutorials, live streams, podcasts, and even surprise art gift boxes. All available at patreon.com/happydartist. I'd love to have you join my Patreon family. I wanted to quickly thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video and for supporting my channel and the art community. I've actually enjoyed using Squarespace for 4 years now to build and host my online shop and website. So whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and visit squarespace.com/happydartist for 10% off your first purchase. Also, if you want to check out more artworks, works in progress, and just random daily artist adventures, feel free to check out my Instagram, and you can follow me at the handle @happydartist.